for putting together the show. I reiterate what Ruth said. I reiterate what Dad said. My mother was a very special woman and a very special artist. I followed her career for only part of it. I am almost 52 years old. Mom made art, exhibited art for 70 years. She first exhibited art in around 1936. She had her first one-woman show, I believe, in 1941 or 42. So this is just one last, but I hope actually not the last one. The most recent. And that's actually what Mom said. You reminded me. She said at one point when she was diagnosed last January, "This is my last work of art." And I said, "Mom, don't talk like that." She said, "Okay, it's my most recent work." And it's her most recent exhibition. And while it does, I think, exhibit some of her best work from recent years, it is only a selection of an incredible body of work that was made over decades. And while I don't want to get into all of my mother's different media and periods, I should make it clear she was an excellent wood sculptor, and many of you have seen her pieces. And after stopping wood sculpture because she thought weak hands for many years, she took it up again in Italy, carving not cherry but olive wood when she was in her 70s, and she created two very wonderful pieces in that decade. She was also a terrific printmaker, and Ruth taught her the monotype. She must have been in her at least 60s, if not, when she learned that, 70s. In her 50s, she learned how to make aqua tints and etchings from Lois Johnson and Nona Hershey and others, and went on to create a remarkable suite of those sorts of prints too, which have been exhibited in other places. There is one example of that, the Jewish cemetery in Prague, and then there are several of these recent wonderful monotypes. So she was a very versatile artist, but in everything that she did, as Dad mentioned, she was focused, she was tenacious, she was dedicated, and she was remarkably creative and inventive, as Ruth said, in her vision. While her children may have been her favorite creation, as Dad has suggested, I think she was tremendously relieved when we all left home to make lives for ourselves, because it allowed her, she was already focused, but to really concentrate on her art the way she had wanted all of her life. She was a woman artist in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, primarily doing representational and figurative art. She was not in New York. That's 3 strikes against you. And remarkably, beginning in the late 70s and through the 1980s, when she was already in her 60s and early 70s, she was able to sort of refocus or regroup her talents, and in a tremendous burst of inspiration, create an enormous body of very, very exciting and innovative work. In the 80s, she was at the age of 72, I think. The Philadelphia Art Museum included her work in an exhibition of emerging artists. And Mom said, "I'm not emerging, I've been here for 50 years. And then the Art Museum went on to buy pieces, and many of her pieces from those periods are in other collections and museums. And she just kept getting better. I mean, it really was remarkable how concentration makes a difference. And someone remarked at a family thing the other night how she seemed kind of vague sometimes. She was vague about all the things that didn't matter to her, and then when she was making her art, she was the most deliberate person, the most centered person, and the most focused person you can imagine. Now, this show does focus on mostly the Italy years, but I want to just point out 1 or 2 other works here that you should be aware of. In the very back is a collage done in 1968 of the Newcastle Steps in Prague, and I feel very close to that work because I was with my mother when she did the initial sketch for that in 1966. In my own sketchbook as a 10-year-old, I have the same scene. It's rather horrific, but it is the same scene. And for many years, I would go around and sketch with my mother until it became clear that those you can't teach, and I then became an art historian. She continued to create. But what she was already doing in the 1960s, which most people don't realize, she already was creating a new type of collage. At that time, collage meant the kind of Picasso, Braque thing, magazine, paper put together in abstract patterns, or what the surrealists were doing, Kurt Schwitter's. What Mom did, she created realism out of materials that you would usually think would have no connection with that particular reality. She took corrugated cardboard from a box and turned it into the most famous staircase in Eastern Europe. She would take pieces of cut-up sponges and turn them into trees. And increasingly, she had huge boxes of collage material in her studio. She would put these materials in new combinations that other people could not or had not imagined. She was the original recycler. She was almost a trash picker. She would always have her eye out for a piece of fabric or a piece of paper or some natural material that everyone else would walk by, a nail on the street, and somehow she would pick that up and incorporate it into a work of art.
Sam, excuse me for interrupting you, but I was in her studio once and I saw this fly swatter, the plastic part of a fly swatter, and I said, Shirley, what are you going to do with this? So she held it up. She said, that's a fence.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Now, what she began doing in that period, and she did a whole series based on sketches that she did in Europe, and I should digress, if I'm not being too long, said she traveled all the time because the family traveled, in large part because Dad's work had us traveling. And Mom responded to new environments always energetically. She had a sketchbook with her all the time, not a camera at that stage, and she would always be drawing. And we have these sketchbooks, and it's a remarkable overview of a career. But as I said, she was sketching, and then she would make new creations out of these sketches. Later, that was in the 1960s, and that's in my brother's collection. Most of those are sold and dispersed. I don't know where they are. There were some wonderful works. In the late 70s and early 80s, she created a new kind of reality, which was not based on what she saw in the sketch, not based on what the literal reality was, but one that was translated through her imagination, through her personal experience, through her emotions. And those are the scenes. Two good examples are over here, the wedding in Nokara and the festa of chestnuts, two different types where she would fastidiously go out on site with her little stool and her watercolors or her pencils or inks and actually do a plein air representation. Then she would take that back with what Ruth had taught her, turn that into a monotype, that is painting it onto a plate, glass or plastic or metal, pulling that, and then she would begin the artwork. Then she would begin to collage it, to populate it, to manipulate it. And she learned early with the collages from the 1960s that the traditional means of collage, cutting up magazines, ended up with colors fading, papers going brittle because they weren't acid-free. So she began to studiously transfer images onto acid-free paper. She would photograph, she would paint over, and then she would move these images into a complex ground to create new narratives. I think there is a lot of influence of medieval and Renaissance narrative art that she was absorbing when she was in Italy, but she knew these things going back to the time that she was a student at Rice and Oberlin. This sense of you could be many places at one time, or many people could be in the same place at the same time. The usual linear narrative of our lives didn't apply in her art. And that you can see that. And sometimes it's a kind of procession, sometimes it's a tapestry, but there's always these interwoven themes that come together. I wish she had done more of these, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, I don't know how many she did in these 2 decades. They were painstaking works. They took a long, long time to create. and you can look at them forever and ever and ever. We have one in our dining room that is always a conversation piece, and people always come back to it, and you always see something new every time you look. It's really brilliant. At the same time, she continued improving her representational skills in traditional watercolor, in pen and ink, and in other media. She also did oils, acrylics, and other types of works. And then she really took delight in the monotype. She loved that squishy feeling of the ink. And I think it was brilliant for her because it allowed her to get away from a certain busyness and a kind of, it gives a more of a softer vision, and that's really appropriate for the Umbrian landscape, and also in these images from Poland, the Polish landscape, which is wet and green, and they're really just wonderful works. I will end by saying into these collages and into a few of the other works, she put, as she created this new world, family members and friends. And these works, whether it's Venice Beach, where there are people she knows from California, or whether it's Noccara, the people from the village where she and Dad spent so many summers in southern Italy, or the festival of the chestnut, where my own son is very small at the bottom, and my nephew and other people, but also all of the villagers that she knew in Italy are represented. She would integrate family, so landscape history, family, narrative, and sort of an iconic representation all came together, I think, in a brilliant fusion. Now, Sushi was my mother, so I'm very enthusiastic about her work, but I really am trying to step aside and look at her work objectively as well as subjectively. And I think if I saw this work and she wasn't my mother, I would still love it. It would appeal to me in a very, very powerful way. So, and actually, for us, even family members, we are seeing all of these works in a new way, because every time you move a painting, you see it differently. So it's great to see them out of her apartment. And many of them have never been seen before. She had made them but had never shown them in recent years, and they were framed especially for this exhibition. So we're really excited. Thank you all, Ruth, Susie, Amanda, everybody, for this opportunity. I know I've spoken too long, but I'm an academic. I just want you to know we're thrilled to do this, and Mom would be so happy. She loved parties, she loved exhibitions, and she loved people to look at her art. That was the most important thing. She made it for people to look at, and to look at again and again. So thank you.